Hello, and welcome to our 7-minute podcast. Because my girlfriend said 4 minutes is never long enough. I am Kenny, and I'm here with our two special guests today.
Hi, I'm John.
I'm Ashley.
And today we're going to be talking to you about the Lai Massacre.
All right, so it all started with the Vietnam War, which started in 1955 and ended in 1975 with the American withdrawal. The war between the Democratic South Vietnamese and USA versus the communist-backed North Vietnamese, or better known as the Viet Cong. The reason for the Americans in this war was to help stop the spread of communism, but ultimately failed.
The war was very controversial in the USA, as many people didn't think that stopping the spread of communism was a good enough reason for our troops to be there. And then on March 16th, 1968 was when the My Lai Massacre occurred. And then Quoc Ngai, where My Lai was located, was known for its communist Viet Cong group, so it became a target for bombings and deadly herbicide incidents, and on that date, the Americans were to come into My Lai.
More than 500 innocent civilians were killed, including women and children who were raped and molested. The Vietnamese people were thrown into trenches, and U.S. soldiers fired machine guns and grenades into the trenches. And Americans tried to cover it up by saying it was a crossfire between them and the Viet Cong.
So throughout our research, the main goal for us was to figure out how the media reported on this incident, and given that it was a very polarized war, for many people being pro-war and many people being anti-war, was there any bias in the reporting of this incident? So the first article we found was a relatively recent one, and that was reported in October of 2021 by the Washington Post, and the article just kind of goes through other articles that were published during or after the incident. So it talks about the very first article after the incident, and it talks about how it was reported that U.S. infantrymen tangled with communist forces threatening the northern city of Quoc Ngai, and 128 Viet Cong were killed. And then it talks about like one of the later articles where they found out that it was over 500 civilians that were killed, and one lieutenant was accused of killing 109 civilians. So the target audience for this article is just kind of the American people, to like kind of shed light on the incident, and I feel like it did a really good job of doing that. And just like, it's kind of just like one of those don't forget it so that we don't make the same mistake again kind of articles.
So the second piece of evidence that we found researching the My Lai was an article by the New Yorker by Seymour Hersh. And before I talk about that, Hersh was an American investigative journalist and political writer, and he was a big journalist during the times of the Vietnam War. And he talked about how the My Lai attack and how they covered it up. And in the article it says, quote, "A claim that 128 Viet Cong were killed and 3 weapons were captured eventually emerged from the task force and worked its way up to the highest American headquarters in Saigon. There it was reported to the world's press as a significant victory," end the quote. "The soldiers who were there during the massacre kept it to themselves, and so did the government. The case started with some of the officers, and that 20 civilians were killed in crossfire between the Americans and Viet Cong." In this article, the target audience would be the American people, and basically what actually happened. The point of view is how they tried to cover it up by saying it was a crossfire. And the key issue is that the government was trying to hide mass murder from basically the rest of the world, and mainly the American people. And it's political lens because the guy who wrote it was anti-war, which is Hersh, and the whole Vietnam War, I mean, obviously, it was very political with the controversies if we should even be there, why are we there.
In another article by the New York Times, it covers a report called the Pierce Report, which was a first-hand account by General Pierce that talked about the truth that he unearthed about the massacre not long after the war had ended. General Pierce had to sift through tons and tons of information and rediscover what was misinformation and what wasn't regarding the killings at My Lai. He faced no easy task. In quotes, there had been a deliberate suppression of information by those who knew what happened and negligent failure to conduct an adequate investigation in the face of evidence that something had gone seriously wrong. Our major coverage is purposely not spreading the correct information, but after years of cover-up and effort to hide the truth, finding it would become an almost impossible task. The report pointed accusations of massive and relentless, hammering home allegations of murder, torture, rape, sodomy, and infanticide during the 3 days of the My Lai operation. This was not going to be easily perceived by the public at all, as what they had previously believed and heard was that the infantry unit on the ground and helicopters were able to assist civilians in leaving the area and in caring for or evacuating the wounded. Peers knew how important it was for our younger and older population to understand and evaluate the wrongdoings of the event, so they wouldn't fear a repeat of history once information had finally been exposed. Historical lens plays a major role in the reporting of this event, as initially our American division, generals, colonels, and lieutenants alike covered up the massacres and murders of Vietnamese civilians. Overall, the key issue is fighting for the truth on an issue that had an ever so false truth promoted by authoritative figures.
So, along my research, I came across this video that was published in 2018 by Thomas Maraska, and it was about the last survivor from the massacre, and his name was Pham Ton Kong, and the video was filmed in My Lai and told the story of basically his experience. He was just a little boy when the massacre occurred, and explained in the video that at 5:30 in the morning is when the U.S. Army fired artillery into the area. 2 white and 1 black American came to the door and lit his house on fire, and then proceeded to point a gun at their head and made all 6 of his family go into the family bomb shelter. His mother went in last so she could protect them from the bullets. Once they were all in the shelter, the Americans threw grenades and killed his whole family, but luckily he survived. He was only knocked out and injured. Around 4 o'clock, his father heard him breathing and rescued him. For the rest of the day, the survivors went to collect the dead bodies. In this video, it shows firsthand experience of the massacre and reveals the secrets of the massacre at a later date. The intended audience is the Americans, so they can understand what really happened. The point of view is that war is crucial and sometimes can lead to horrible acts like the My Lai. In this video, it shows historical lens and provides information on what really happened in our past. Overall, this video provides perfect evidence that back during the Vietnam War ages, information like this was never reported.
Our last article was published by the Los Angeles Times in 1993 and was distributed on the 25th anniversary of the My Lai Massacre. In the article, it talks about what happened that day and has first-hand reports from the soldiers that were there, one stating, and I quote, "It was a Nazi kind of thing," end quote. The purpose of this article is to remember that dark day in U.S. history, and things like this need to be remembered to ensure they don't happen again. The article does appear to have some loaded language, such as the Nazi reference, but in this case I don't think it's biased. I think it's necessary in order to really have the readers comprehend what happened that day. The target audience of the article was the American people, especially the people in LA, because it was published by the LA Times. The purpose was to inform readers and others about the incident, and the writer is writing the article about 25 years after the event and shedding light on new information that had never before been presented. He obviously is against what happened, but I think almost every person in America is against the killing of over 100 innocent civilians from whatever country. And I think the article has a historical and psychological lens, because it's an article about an event that happened 25 years before it was written. So the author knows more about the incident than was first originally reported. Um, and at the end of the article, it talks about how most humans in certain situations will do anything authority tells them to without thinking about the consequences until after. So that's where the psychological lens comes from.
So, in conclusion, on this very historical event, the whole Vietnam War was very controversial with if we should even be there, if we shouldn't, pro war, anti war, all that stuff, very political, and how the government basically covered up the My Lai massacre with lies and excuses. And the Vietnamese obviously knew what really happened, and the Americans that were there that did the doing knew what happened. And it wasn't till a later date for when the American people knew what actually happened.